Up here! This way! Over here! I'm up on the colonnade of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, high above the crowd, looking down on all these Catholics. Not many people are allowed up here. You know what the Vatican's like. It's been ruling the Catholics for 2,000 years, so there's no need to be nice to me. But I told them what I wanted to do up here, and they agreed immediately. Because they could see as well that this is the best place to do what I wanted to do, which is to understand properly, at last, that great, sprawling, ungainly, but glorious art movement, the Baroque. The Baroque age doesn't have a nice, clear outline. It sprawled across the 17th century and beyond. It wasn't a tidy movement, but it spawned some of our greatest art. The architect of this astounding square, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, was one of the key players of the Baroque. Understand Bernini, and you understand the whole thing. And what he invented here, in this piazza, was this huge colonnade that encircles you, gathers you up. It's like a giant pair of arms. Now, 300,000 people could fit in here. That's 3 times more than Wembley Stadium. And every single one of them gets this big hug from Bernini's piazza. So that's the first thing the Baroque does. It goes after you and ingratiates itself with you. Other art movements sit there on their pedestals and arrogantly assume you'll be interested in them. But the Baroque knows you better. It gets off the pedestal and hunts you down. Another of its ambitions is to impress you with its bigness, its grandeur, its drama. Would you look at the size of that? And when it fell into the hands of intense geniuses, it became dark and edgy, got all psychological on us, and blurred the divide between art and reality. And when painting wasn't enough, the Baroque roped in all the other arts to work on you as well. Architecture, sculpture, music, everything at once. It was after you, so it threw the kitchen sink at you. What we're going to do in this series is follow the Baroque from St. Peter's to St. Paul's, from Rome, where it all began, to London, where it fetched up eventually. Because another of the things that makes the Baroque special is its range. It went everywhere and basically spent the entire 17th century travelling about. And the really cunning thing about it is that wherever it went, it adopted the local customs and changed. And the first place we're going to visit is up here in northern Italy, Trento. Trento in the Italian Dolomites is a pretty town which I recommend for walking holidays and mountain views. But don't let its modern tranquility fool you, because a great war started up here, a war of art. The Baroque is best understood as a fight back, a marvellous display of counter-punching by a waspish church that had come out fighting. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses onto the church door in Wittenberg in 1517 and launched the Protestant revolt against what he called the sink of Roman sodomy, the popes, the cardinals, he wasn't just taking on the Catholic Church. Luther was taking on the whole of Italy, the entire southern Mediterranean worldview and all that goes with it. The colours, the fruitiness, the passions. In those days, Trento was in Austria, not in Italy. And it was here that the mighty Council of Trent met in 1545 to plot the fight back. A wild boar has invaded the vineyard, complained Pope Leo X memorably. The Baroque's task was to hunt that boar down and dispatch it. For nearly 20 years, the Council of Trent met here in the cathedral in Trento to plan the Catholic riposte. And art was involved from the start. The Lutherans had been against art. They saw it as a regrettable vanity that led to the worship of false idols. Terrible waves of iconoclasm had torn across Northern Europe, destroying paintings, burning statues. But the Catholic Church had always believed in art. It relied on it. It knew that people like to see what they're worshipping. They like images. And that gave art tremendous power. Great profit is derived from all sacred images, declared the council. And when we kiss the sacred image and prostrate ourselves before it, we adore Christ. If anyone shall teach contrary to these decrees, concluded the council scarily, let him be anathema, anathema, anathema.
Do you like the map? Baroque, of course.
It was produced in Amsterdam in 1617 by Willem Blauw, the finest and busiest of the Baroque map makers. Blauw would later be employed by the East India Company to chart the new world that was being discovered at this time. But first, he drew Europe. See, the big capitals of Europe at the top. London, Paris, Amsterdam. And down the sides, what people were wearing in these fashionable new capitals. Look, there are the English in their silks. And over here, those Baroque heroes, the Poles with the feathers in their hats. So the Baroque fight back began up here in Trento, but its epicenter, the place where the fireworks really went off, was down south in Rome. The Eternal City had a fight on its hands. As the clock ticked over from the 16th century to the 17th, Its architecture grew prouder, louder, showier, and bulged up through the Roman skyline. But, as I said, the Baroque went after you with all the arts at once. And while architecture and sculpture were frolicking in the Roman sunshine, the art form that needed the most drastic attention, painting, chose another path. The Council of Trent instructed its artists to get out there and grab people's attention. But how do you do that? One very effective trick is to make dramatic use of the dark and turn painting into theatre. That was the strategy of the Baroque's greatest revolutionary, a pictorial genius who made damn sure that the religious message of the Counter-Reformation came after you like a spotlit Rottweiler. This master of dramatic darkness was, of course, Michelangelo Medici da Caravaggio, who deserves our sympathy as well as our admiration. Poor Caravaggio. For 300 years, he was completely forgotten, his reputation in tatters, and then the 20th century rediscovered him and began misunderstanding him in such terrible ways. What rubbish has been spouted about Caravaggio? Even sensible commentators on sensible TV channels have insisted on seeing him as a knife-mad, predatory homosexual who went berserk in Baroque Rome, the Ripper of Roma. This demonic image of Caravaggio annoys me like nothing else in the Baroque world. As if a sex-mad, out-of-control Roman crazy could really have painted this. Thank heavens, recent research into Caravaggio has begun correcting all this nonsense, and we can start seeing him again for what he really was, the most important religious painter of the Counter-Reformation. Caravaggio did everything the Council of Trent demanded of its artists. He created a vivid new religious art that spoke to the people in a language they could effortlessly understand, a language that moved them and changed them. Before Caravaggio came along, religious art was set somewhere out there, somewhere distant and fluffy. But he made sure it took place right under your nose. Here, now, close enough to touch. The cast list changed too. Real people rounded up in taverns and markets and chosen for their characterful faces replaced the impossible gods of old. There's that old bloke from the market, and that beautiful waitress from the tavern. These are people you recognize from the streets, people you can touch and whose plight touches you. It's as if Caravaggio has set himself the task of completely reinventing religious art, and he uses every Baroque trick in the book to get your attention. The way this basket of fruit is about to fall over, so you want to reach in and push it back. Or the apostles' hands shoved out into your face. It's all so real, so tangible, so believable. The churches of Baroque Rome are filled with magnificent free helpings of Caravaggio. Just go in, pretend you're praying, and feel his power. Here in the church of Santa Maria del Popolo, where he began working in 1600, he pushes a horse's backside into your face so uncouthly, and ensures you will not miss the dramatic calling of St. Paul taking place at the horse's feet. On the other wall, St. Peter is being crucified upside down. Did you ever see such sweaty effort, such tugging, such pulling, such pain? Look how different it all was from the usual way of spreading the religious message.
Caravaggio's art was so tangible, so vivid, so cinematic, that the Roman clergy, which was used to an altogether rosier religious palette, found him a challenge. Some of his greatest paintings were rejected by the churches that had commissioned them.
This one here was originally going to hang in St. Peter's. Jesus and Mary stamping on the snake of sin. Was he a little too human for them? Was she a little too sexy? Even his great Death of the Virgin was rejected by the monks. Mary, they spat, looked like a bloated whore who'd been pulled out of a river. But I don't think she does. She just looks like a real woman. And in my book, Caravaggio was the best painter of convincing Marys the world of art has seen. Are they too beautiful for their own good? Maybe. Do I mind that? Not at all.
While the clergy complained, the public responded and understood. Caravaggio's lesson, his darkness, his drama, seeped out of Rome and infiltrated the international Baroque at an astonishing speed. And wherever it fetched up, in Spain, in Flanders, in Holland, it transformed the local art. It's a strange name for an art movement, don't you think? Baroque. What does it mean? Where does it come from? If you think of the Renaissance, that's a very clear idea. Renaissance is French for rebirth, the rebirth of civilization. But Baroque? It actually comes from a Portuguese word, barroco, which means a misshapen pearl, like this one. All these Portuguese explorers were setting off around the world, and they were coming back with gorgeous pearls in all shapes and sizes. Now this pearl is not Baroque. This is like the Renaissance, perfectly formed, exquisite, delicate, so civilized, precious. This one, however, the Baroque pearl, is blobby, exuberant, misshapen, difficult to handle, and exciting in a deformed kind of way. So this is the Renaissance, this is the Baroque.
Nowhere was this Barocco outline more obvious than in the bendy direction now taken by architecture. Rome is basically a Baroque creation. I know it's got the great ancient ruins and the fine Renaissance palaces, but the default architecture here, the stuff that gives the city its main mood, is Baroque. This beautiful little Baroque secret is a courtyard designed in the 1630s by a genius of the Roman Baroque called Borromini, Francesco Borromini.
Borromini, in my opinion, was the single most exciting architect there's ever been. A genius, a man of twisted brilliance. The Picasso of architecture. This tiny courtyard he designed for the church of San Carlo in Rome is almost Gothic in its brooding intensity. I don't know if you can feel it in the film, but in the flesh, you can certainly sense the solemnity, the sparse profundity of this tiny little space. And remember, architecture speaks to the body, not just the eyes.
Borromini was so inventive. Can you see the balustrade up there? Look at the actual balusters. The way some of them bulge at the top and others bulge at the bottom. What for? The Renaissance would never have done something as wayward and playful as that. But Borromini was a rule breaker by instinct, and that makes him totally Baroque.
So this is the cloister around which the monks would walk and read their Bibles. Now look at the church. It's like walking into a stony piece of sculpture. I've been in here scores of times. I never miss it if I'm in Rome. And I've stared and stared at this remarkable interior. But if you asked me to draw what's happening to the walls in here, I couldn't do it. It's too complicated, too fidgety, too inventive. But what I can do is to try and draw a plan of the building, because it's completely crazy. What Borromini's trying to do here is to blend two completely different shapes. Out here, there's a kind of blunt Greek cross. So a Greek cross with the ends taken off. But in the middle, all that becomes a perfect oval. So this is the edge of the church, all this seemingly chaotic going in and out. But underlying it, as you can see, is this perfect bit of geometry made up of rectangles, made up of triangles, and these circles here. And that's what Borromini always does. He builds this exact mathematical basis, and then he just ruffles it up like someone messing up your hair.
I've seen geometry as madly busy as that on the great domes of Islam, but never in a Christian church. Borromini supplied Baroque architecture
with something dark and emotional. It's feminine principle. It's yin. But every yin, of course, needs a yang. And in Baroque Rome, the undisputed king of yang was Gian Lorenzo Bernini. The great Bernini was everything that Borromini wasn't. Handsome, rich, haughty, a smooth operator who charmed the kings and the popes. As architect, as sculptor, as painter, the man could do everything, and the raw spirit of the Baroque coursed through his veins as fiercely as the water spouting from one of his fountains.
Where Borromini was almost certainly homosexual, and he died this terrible death. He committed suicide, threw himself on his sword, and took a long time to die. Bernini was a ladies' man, through and through. And Bernini would never have dreamt of killing himself, because that would have deprived the world of his flamboyant genius. San Andrea al Quirinale by Bernini. It's just a couple of 100 feet up the road from Borromini's San Carlo, but it seems to come from a different architectural planet. Borromini invented the curved church facade that bends the front of the church out into the street. But Bernini, he got really good at it too. And then out here, another curve going the other way. And that's the Baroque for you. It twists this way and that, always on the move, like a restless dragonfly. Walking into Bernini's San Andrea is like walking into a piece of theatre. Bernini fills his church with rich colour. Look at that lantern up there, that golden lantern. You put yellow glass up there, so when the sun shines, it's as if the whole interior is being flooded with this gorgeous, golden, divine light. Bernini's church has this very specific storyline for you to notice and follow. So St. Andrew, the patron of the church, is being martyred here. He's heading up towards heaven there. And right at the very top, in the lantern, he's being welcomed into heaven. The little cherubs are even standing aside to make room for him so he can go up there. It's a very theatrical effect, very different from anything Borromini ever tried to do. The Baroque had a taste for theatricality. That's why it liked Bernini so much. And if you want to witness some truly stupendous Baroque theatre, then follow me into St. Peter's. That extraordinary creation in front of us is Bernini's Baldacchino, put up under the transept between 1624 and 1633. Now you have a good look at it, you tell me. Is that sculpture, or is it architecture? Or is it a combination of the two, so it doesn't really matter? I go for the last option. That's what you get with a Baroque. All the dividing lines get blurred. Santa Maria della Vittoria, which many people consider to be Bernini's masterpiece, including Bernini. It shows the Spanish saint, Saint Teresa of Avila, at a moment when she's having a vision. An angel has come down to her from heaven, and he's piercing her heart with a flaming arrow. So real was the pain to me that I moaned out loud several times. And yet, it was so indescribably sweet that I could not wish to be released from it. When the angel withdrew his spear, I was left with a great love of God. What he's done here is create a kind of theatre in the church. On either side, sitting in these boxes, is the family that commissioned the Cornaro Chapel, the Cornaro family. Up there on the right, with the little beard, looks a little bit like Shakespeare. That's Federico Cornaro. He's the one who actually paid for it all. So the Cornaro family has gathered to witness this miraculous event at the centre. The other thing that people always pick up on about this work is this look on St. Teresa's face. This open-mouthed, moaning look. Now, what Bernini's trying to do here is to find some sculptural form for this religious ecstasy that she's feeling. But the 20th century in particular has misinterpreted that look on her face. All sorts of smutty remarks have been made about her ecstasy. What kind of ecstasy is it? Wink, wink. I really disagree with all of that. Imagine trying to find a sculptural form for something as difficult as a young woman being overpowered by the love of God. How do you convey that? What do you show? Well, I'll tell you the answer. That's what you do. This is art dazzling you with miracles. In Bernini's hands, stone comes alive and stops behaving like stone. He could turn rock into flesh, and women into trees. His work is filled with movement and restless transformation. The Cornaro Chapel is a fusion of sculpture, painting, marbling, gilding. Even the real light of God has been roped into achieving this great Baroque effect. If you're investigating the Baroque, this is a position I recommend, because from here you can see the Baroque properly. The Baroque loved painted ceilings, filling the air above you and around you with remarkable sights was a very Baroque ambition. Of course, painted ceilings had existed in Italian art for centuries. The Sistine Chapel was just the best-known example. But they're difficult to do. The Baroque, however, was never afraid of effort. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, the Baroque was up for it. And it developed such a fierce appetite for the painted ceiling. When the art is all around you and above you, it creates this other world into which you've stepped, a new reality. Think of it, perhaps, as a kind of 17th century virtual reality, because these painted ceilings blur the divide between the art and you.
This is the first great painted room of the Baroque age. These days, it's the French embassy in Rome, and they've kindly let us in because the French are such fine people.
But back in the Baroque age, this fine palace belonged to Cardinal Odoardo Farnese, one of the most powerful clerics in Rome. And in 1597, at the very dawn of the Baroque era, Farnese commissioned a young painter from Bologna, Annibale Carracci, to come to Rome with his brothers, who were also artists, and to paint this.
Cardinal Odoardo Farnese should have been a man of God, and perhaps in his public life he was. But in his private life, back here in his palace, he seems to have unleashed his sinful side. And what he commissioned Annibale Carracci to paint in the Piano Nobile of the Farnese Palace is a room filled with stories about the mad love affairs of the gods.
Wherever you turn in here, pagan gods are loving other gods, in a divine orgy of love and conflict and role-playing and naughtiness.
Carracci has somehow managed to celebrate 20 different divine love affairs simultaneously on this one ceiling. And to do that, he's employed a cunning optical trick. Each of the love affairs is taking place inside its own picture. And all these pictures have been crammed onto the roof, where they're held wonkily in place by a busy assortment of cupids, nudes, and statues. And then it gets even more complicated, because all these cherubs refuse to stay outside the action, so they get involved. Sometimes they're inside the picture, other times they're outside the picture. Time and space are being played with by a master scenographer. They're being pulled out of the true in this glorious jumble of realities.
This room was to be hugely influential, and what the Carracci invented here was to become one of the main ingredients of the Baroque. We dart about in this series, going here and there, with me telling you this and that, trying to grasp the Baroque. But to be honest, there's a much easier way.
All you have to do to understand the Baroque fully and perfectly is to come in here and look up at that. That is the Baroque.
We're in the Jesuit church of San Ignazio. It was built to celebrate the canonization of Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. That's him up there on the cloud. In 1626, Pope Gregory XV officially made Ignatius a saint, and all this could begin.
The Jesuits liked to keep things in-house. It kept down the costs and ensured that the opinions being expressed by the artist were Jesuit opinions. So for this church, they got in a Jesuit lay brother from Trento.
Padre Pozzo. Pozzo was a master of illusion. He was the best there's ever been at making small spaces look huge. His influential book on achieving these amazing optical illusions was read by everybody through the ages. They even say that Cecil B. DeMille consulted it when planning his biggest cinema moments. Because Padre Pozzo was a wonderful movie maker, born 300 years early. Pozzo's first work in here was this dark, illusionistic dome, which, unlike a real dome, was cheap and easy to repair. You just got someone in and repainted it. The little dome was so convincing, the Jesuits decided to unleash Pozzo on the rest of the church. All that is basically a flat roof. The entire sky has been painted. Every cloud, every architrave, every column. What Pozzo's done here is to use his Baroque magic to open up the roof and create this stupendous shortcut to heaven. And right in the middle, floating up on a cloud, is St. Ignatius himself. He's going up to heaven, where Jesus is waiting to greet him. And see that glorious light emanating from the wound in Jesus' side? That's the light of divine revelation, pouring out of Jesus and into St. Ignatius. And then it's being scattered further to the four corners of the earth. To Asia, with that rather wonky camel. To Africa, with what I suppose must be a crocodile. Europe, rather tame in comparison. And America, where a bare-chested Red Indian Amazon looks down at a roaring cougar. All these were places that the Jesuits had their missions. It's what my daughter might call a rather cheesy bit of Jesuit propaganda. But what fantastic theatre, what ambition, what scale, what excitement.
There's something in here I want to show you. It's a little Baroque gem, a secret. It's more work by Padre Pozzo. So it's a kind of illusionistic colonnade, all painted by Pozzo, showing the story of the life of St. Ignatius, because we're in the Jesuit college deep inside somewhere. I'm not sure exactly which bit of it. Now, what's amazing about this is that you can get really close to the Pozzo painting and see how it's done. For example, can you see the two figures over there holding up an urn on the left? Right, I'll go and point it out to you. Stay there, stay there. These two figures here. Come over here. Look at that. That's how wide they have to be. So all of these figures, all the architecture, has been corrected so that it only looks right from one place. Like all of Pozzo's work, you have to stand on a particular spot for it to look good. Someone asked Pozzo about that once. They said, what's the point of doing one of these things when you can only see it from one place? That means only one person at a time can see it properly. And he said, that's their problem. My job is to paint it. Their job is to understand it.
So here in Rome, a revolution had been launched. Painting had been reinvented. Sculpture transformed. Architecture revolutionized. And it was time for the Baroque to spread its wings. Soon enough, it would arrive on the doorstep of most of the known world and become the first truly global art movement. But first, there was the rest of Italy to conquer. Down here in Naples, for instance, all sorts of Baroque darknesses were stirring. I don't want to go down there. I'm scared. But the story of the Baroque leaves me no option. There's a book that's very popular now. I'm sure you've heard of it. 1,000 Places to See Before You Die, by Patricia Schulz. Naples isn't in it, but it should be, because that title, about seeing places before you die, is taken from a line by Goethe. See Naples and die, wrote Goethe ambiguously in the 18th century, after he'd spent some time here. But what exactly did he mean? Is he saying that Naples is so beautiful that once you've seen it, you'll die happy? Or is he saying that Naples is so dangerous that if you come here, the chances are you'll end up dead? In Caravaggio's day, this was the second biggest city in Europe after Paris. 500 million people were squashed into Naples, most of them out of work and living in slums. 1 in 10 of the inhabitants was some sort of cleric, a priest, a nun. So religion and wickedness had carved up Naples between them, and the two of them were operating here in tandem. Caravaggio turned up in Naples in 1606. He'd gotten into an argument in Rome over a tennis match and murdered his opponent. Now he was on the run. At that time, Naples was a Spanish colony, separate from the rest of Italy. So all sorts of ruffians, thieves, murderers and good-for-nothings turned up here, fleeing from the Italian authorities. Caravaggio's reputation got to Naples before he did, and he was soon at work here at his usual breakneck speed, painting some of his greatest pictures. The moment he reached Naples, his art seemed to grow darker. Rome may be where the Baroque was born, but Naples was where it learned to scream and howl. Signora, buongiorno. This is the Piemonte di Misericordia. It's the home church of another of these strange little confraternities that were so busy in the Baroque. The Misericordianists dispensed charity to the poor, so, as you can imagine, they were very busy in Naples. Caravaggio painted this soon after he arrived. He was only in Naples for less than a year, but see what he achieved. There's a school of thought which believes that this picture, the 7 Acts of Mercy, is the greatest religious painting of the 17th century. And I'm not about to disagree. We're on a street corner in Naples. There's a prison on the right. And over here, out of sight, there's a tavern. The original idea was to paint each of the 7 acts of mercy in a separate altarpiece in the chapel. Caravaggio has combined all of them in one picture. Now you'll be thinking, what the hell are the 7 acts of mercy? Good question. Basically, they're 7 human kindnesses that you can and should perform for your fellows. And I'm sure that you do. First, you have to bury the dead. And that's going on here, see? There's the little feet of a fresh corpse being carried away. Another act of mercy is to clothe the naked, and St. Martin here has cut his cloak in half and presents it to a naked beggar. You also have to help the sick and the infirm, and that's going on down here too, because the naked beggar is also a lowly cripple, pulling himself along on the ground. You also have to visit those in prison, as she's doing over here. And you're meant to feed the hungry as well. And this kindly daughter is giving suck to her own imprisoned father. It's a startling sight. The charitable are supposed to offer shelter to pilgrims. He's a pilgrim, you can tell from the shell in his hat. So the innkeeper here is offering him a room for the night. Finally, the thirsty must be given something to drink. So Samson, in the gloom, is gulping down the contents of an ass's jaw. So there you have it, 7 acts of mercy, all recorded in one Baroque tornado of a composition.
Caravaggio wasn't the only lawbreaker to seek refuge in Naples. There were many others, including a Spanish painter and Caravaggio worshipper called Giuseppe Ribera, or as the locals called him, La Spagnoletto, the Little Spaniard.
This little Spaniard, Ribera, was a quarrelsome devil. He came to Naples to flee his creditors in Rome. And because Naples was under Spanish control then, Ribera had his pick of rich Spanish clients.
For most of his career, he painted in the Caravaggio manner, dark, brooding religious art, sweaty and guilty. But his Spanish roots began to show soon enough, and his taste for the macabre was legendary. This is Ribera's infamous bearded woman, whom he painted more than once. Ribera liked bearded women. And this deceptively cheerful, smiling boy is actually a cripple with a club foot. When you notice his deformity, the smile on his face takes on a different meaning.
Ribera was the main mover in a nasty little organization, a kind of mini mafia called the Cabal of Naples. He got together with 2 other local miscreants, a vicious Greek called Correnzio, and a fine Neapolitan painter, Caracciolo, who deserves a much better reputation than he's got. Because Caracciolo painted some magnificently dark Neapolitan pictures. So these 3, Ribera, Corenzio and Caracciolo began beating up and murdering all their rivals. If you were a foreign painter taking business away from the Cabal of Naples, you'd better beware. The Cabal was particularly cruel to the followers of Annibale Carracci. Domenichino came here to paint a fresco, and every morning the Cabal would remove what he'd done the day before, and then they put sand in his paint. Domenichino died in Naples, poisoned, they say, by the Cabal. Poor old Guido Reni had an even worse time. The Cabal hired an assassin to murder him. And this assassin made a mistake and killed one of Reni's assistants instead. And Reni fled the city, never to return. So one of his pupils was sent down here to finish the commission. And this pupil was lured onto a boat in the Bay of Naples and never heard from again.
The Cabal of Naples was wound up in 1641, but its work was done. The cheerful side of the Baroque had been kept out of Naples. By the time the Cabal was done with it, the Baroque had forgotten many of its good intentions. Darkness, violence, murder, horror, those were Naples's black gifts to the Baroque. And particularly to Spain, where our journey continues in the next film, and where the Baroque was taken to such passionate extremes.
Against what he called the sink of Roman sodomy, the popes, the cardinals. He wasn't just taking on the Catholic Church. Luther was taking on the whole of Italy, the entire southern Mediterranean worldview and all that goes with it. The colours, the fruitiness, the passions.
In those days, Trento was in Austria, not in Italy. And it was here that the mighty Council of Trent met in 1545 to plot the fight back. A wild boar has invaded the vineyard, complained Pope Leo X memorably. The Baroque's task was to hunt that boar down and dispatch it.
For nearly 20 years, the Council of Trent met here in the cathedral in Trento to plan the Catholic riposte. And art was involved from the start. The Lutherans had been against art. They saw it as a regrettable vanity that led to the worship of false idols. Terrible waves of iconoclasm had torn across Northern Europe, destroying paintings, burning statues. But the Catholic Church had always believed in art. It relied on it. It knew that people like to see what they're worshipping. They like images. And that gave art tremendous power. Great profit is derived from all sacred images, declared the council. And when we kiss the sacred image and prostrate ourselves before it, we adore Christ. If anyone shall teach contrary to these decrees, concluded the council scarily, let him be anathema, anathema, anathema.
Do you like the map? Baroque, of course.
It was produced in Amsterdam in 1617 by Willem Blauw, the finest and busiest of the Baroque map makers. Blauw would later be employed by the East India Company to chart the new world that was being discovered at this time. But first, he drew Europe. See, the big capitals of Europe at the top. London, Paris, Amsterdam. And down the sides, what people were wearing in these fashionable new capitals. Look, there are the English in their silks. And over here, those Baroque heroes, the Poles with the feathers in their hats. So the Baroque fight back began up here in Trento, but its epicenter, the place where the fireworks really went off, was down south in Rome.
The Eternal City had a fight on its hands. As the clock ticked over from the 16th century to the 17th, its architecture grew prouder, louder, showier, and bulged up through the Roman skyline. But, as I said,
I'm up here. This way. Over here.
I'm up on the colonnade of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, high above the crowd, looking down on all these Catholics.
Not many people are allowed up here. You know what the Vatican's like. It's been ruling the Catholics for 2,000 years, so there's no need to be nice to me. But I told them what I wanted to do up here, and they agreed immediately. Because they could see as well that this is the best place to do what I wanted to do, which is to understand properly, at last, that great, sprawling, ungainly, but glorious art movement, the Baroque.
The Baroque age doesn't have a nice, clear outline. It sprawled across the 17th century and beyond. It wasn't a tidy movement, but it spawned some of our greatest art.
The architect of this astounding square, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, was one of the key players of the Baroque. Understand Bernini, and you understand the whole thing. And what he invented here, in this piazza, was this huge colonnade that encircles you, gathers you up. It's like a giant pair of arms. Now, 300,000 people could fit in here. That's 3 times more than Wembley Stadium. And every single one of them gets this big hug from Bernini's Piazza.
So that's the first thing the Baroque does. It goes after you and ingratiates itself with you. Other art movements sit there on their pedestals and arrogantly assume you'll be interested in them. But the Baroque knows you better. It gets off the pedestal and hunts you down. Another of its ambitions is to impress you with its bigness.
Its grandeur, its drama.
Would you look at the size of that? And when it fell into the hands of intense geniuses, it became dark and edgy, got all psychological on us, and blurred the divide between art and reality. And when painting wasn't enough, the Baroque roped in all the other arts to work on you as well. Architecture, sculpture, music, everything at once. It was after you, so it threw the kitchen sink at you.
What we're going to do in this series is follow the Baroque from St. Peter's to St. Paul's, from Rome, where it all began, to London, where it fetched up eventually. Because another of the things that makes the Baroque special is its range. It went everywhere and basically spent the entire 17th century travelling about. And the really cunning thing about it is that wherever it went, it adopted the local customs and changed. And the first place we're going to visit is up here in northern Italy, in Trento.
Trento in the Italian Dolomites is a pretty town which I recommend for walking holidays and mountain views. But don't let its modern tranquility fool you, because a great war started up here, a war of art. The Baroque is best understood as a fight back, a marvellous display of counter-punching by a waspish church that had come out fighting.
When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses onto the church door in Wittenberg in 1517 and launched the Protestant revolt,